Today, I'm joined by Jenny Klochko, who is a journalist, author, and founder of Ukrainian Jenny Meets podcast. Her background is as a TV and radio presenter and marketing communications producer. I hope you like this video. I certainly enjoyed this conversation, and we may well have many more chats in the future. Before we jump into it, please do make sure you're subscribed. Check out Jenny's channel, the links of which will be in the description as well. And also, obviously, help creators like ourselves to carry on doing what we're doing through Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, these kind of things. It all definitely helps. And if you can't do that, if you don't have the means to help out, then by all means, please do what you can to spread the word, share the channel with friends, family, and colleagues.
You've been fascinated with Russian culture, Russian literature, whatsoever Russian. Spent some time in Russia,
Yeah.
and was it 3 years ago you started the channel pro-Ukrainian, and I noticed I was listening to a few interviews, and first of all, a part of the host of the Silicon Curtain, you also introduced as the most pro-Ukrainian, the most influential in pro-Ukraine position, and I was thinking, was this and when this shift happened? Because I think in a way it's generational.
Yeah.
And I worked with people in the British media, sort of who were studying and learning about Russia, and some of them still can't give up and accept the evil and face the reality. So where's your shift into it?
I'm going to give a sort of odd answer here. I didn't shift. I haven't been involved in the media, and I haven't been in academia for a very long time. Since I finished a sort of MA at Edinburgh a long time ago, in 1997, I think it was. So, pre-Putin era. And after I traveled a lot and lived a lot in Russia from 92 onwards. I started studying and did my first trip to Moscow in 1992. Lenin was still on the currency long
Remember
ago.
this?
Yeah. And then I traveled all through the 90s. My last major trip was 98. Yeah, I was there from really the last major period I spent any time was in 1998. And for a year at that point, I was working, teaching English, doing various bits, market research and so on, but also living in a kommunalka, which again, yeah. It's a unique experience, which you reference some of the people who are in the media who can't get over or can't really understand or penetrate the surface of what Russia's like. Well, living in a kommunalka gives you a view that I think many will not have had. My honeymoon was in Vorkuta.
And in a second,
Yeah.
who hates you that much to send you to Vorkuta for your honeymoon?
Wages were 4 to 6 times higher than they were in central Russia. So this was an interesting place. It was a very well funded, quite I wouldn't say luxurious, but certainly it had resources expended on it, and wages were high, and it had shops which they might not have been Moscow shops. You might not have been able to get the same kind of blood you get in Moscow, but they would have had more stuff in the shops potentially than some provincial towns. So yeah, okay, it's not 9 months of snow cover, and you have this wonderful piece in about May where you might have blizzards and white nights at the same time, where the sun does this in the sky. But hell, for a few extra rubles a month, you're going to put up with some of that stuff, right? So it was just, yeah, for me, it was an experience. But as I say, I didn't go from being a sort of Russophile with rose-tinted spectacles, thinking everything was wonderful. No, I studied Russian history from the age of about sort of 16 onwards, or 15, no, 15 onwards. And I started reading Russian literature at 14. And I always found it deeply traumatic, fascinating, but deeply, deeply traumatized. I mean, Dostoevsky is a genius, but he's also mentally ill. He's mentally ill. You can tell it. You read his books and you're inhabiting the brain of someone who is sick. He's really sick. He's insightful, but he's sick in the head. So I'm not going to romanticize it. And it helped to understand. And actually, I know you're not going to like this. It still helps me in a way to understand some of the mentality, but not in a romanticized way, in the effect of trauma on how people think, how they turn to conspiracy theories and so on. There's a lot of this stuff in Dostoevsky. There's a lot of Russian behavior that looks counterlogical to us. And this behavior is also manifested in their geopolitics. You can find some of this way of thinking, analysis of it in Dostoevsky. I mean, you really can. But I'm not saying it's pretty or nice or it should be romanticized. It's really it's an author describing a form of mental psychosis. Um,
I won't remember the Dostoevsky exact quote, but the meaning is like you can get the happiness through suffering, through some sort of like pain, and underline sort of like you can't be just happy. There's wrong to be just happy. And when I was 13 and in my literature, my Russian literature lessons, do you know, I did, because it was Russian school, I'm from central Ukraine, and so we did read a lot. I love literature, so, but at the same time, it was in a way, yeah, it's kind of, it's like you come to the circus and you can see a human with 8 limbs, something like that. So I absolutely don't agree that this is something great or talented or anything. It's been created like that because Russian propaganda is actually for centuries. I won't remember exactly the year, but the whole concept was developed by the diplomat. Opposite to the West, is like, yes, we can write stories, we can do something. So it wasn't actually natural or organic, any creation. And even, Russia itself, the name is not actually Russian because it was stolen and during the reign of Peter I from Kiev Rus, because all before it was Moscovia. It's nothing to do with Russian. And when Brits referring to, big Russia, how vast is the country, actually meaning the Soviet Union and the big red mark, which is, and they lose in the moment that it's actually 15 countries, 130 nationalities and languages. So it's not kind of any big or great.
yeah.
It's just people squeezed
Yeah.
in one space and tortured.
Yeah. And we have to remember that those authors who try to show aspects of the country in a more honest light, and this really talks to this idea that literature is seen as transformational in Russian culture. It's seen as much more political than literature is in the West. There's a canon of literary greats that I know a lot of people who went through university at Russia will have been forced to read a lot of them, and a lot of people boast about what they've read. They drop names and so on. I kind of suspect that not everyone's read everything. In fact, very few people have read even a small fraction of the Russian literature. But there's this concept of a core or common kind of culture. But I should say that is in itself an imperialist construct, because when you had authors like Alexander Radishev, who came up and wrote something that's a little bit less, let's say, complimentary about the system, or who point out some of the the downsides of the imperial character of it. They are persecuted, they're killed, they're locked up, they're persecuted, they're put into insane asylums. This isn't a literature that tolerates really challenge, innovation, and truth. It does seep out sometimes. I never say it's the whole truth. Like, you have a complex writer like Bulgakov, who's got really interesting stuff, but Ukrainians aren't a huge fan of him, because even though I believe he has Ukrainian ancestry, he's really imbibed the Russian sort of imperial idea.
He
So I
hated
think
Ukraine. He
he
he he
hated
respected the
Ukraine.
culture. He everything. So why Ukraine would respect him?
They've
And
no reason
again,
to. Yeah.
he's one of those. You see, it's the. I don't know. Sometimes I'm struggling to explain to the people in the West and the viewers, subscribers. So the creation of good writer or talented writer or something. And for example, whereas Ukrainian, the blossom of the nation, was executed. I don't know if you're aware of executed Renaissance.
Renaissance, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Done some
So
episodes with Sasha Dozhik and others on this topic. Incredibly important topic. I'd never heard of it until I started doing
see,
the podcast.
and this
I'd
is sort of
never
like
heard of it.
Russian culture, destroy everyone else, and a point, you're going to be the hero, you're going to be the writer, you're going to be the actress. And it's nothing to do with the actual talent, achievement, force, or perseverance, nothing. And it's just, in the Soviet Union, you probably, if you went through Communalka and you survived all of that, so you went through the most probably hardcore of integration into culture. So it's like all the cultures in Soviet Union equal, a part of one. Not that equal. And where you probably know yourself how Georgian people or Armenian or Ukrainians were mocked because they don't speak decent language. Their sounds not like that, and how they were nicknamed. And if you see any Soviet film, you will see who is greedy and fat. It's going to be Ukrainian. And he's going to be definitely, or she's going to be a traitor. And these are kind of like stigma, stimulated. And then Russians say, so-called good Russians, like, oh, we were such a big country. We loved each other in unity. No, you occupied everyone. That's why the Baltic countries escaped as soon as they could, lucky ones.
Did you see the interview with Vitaly Portnikov and Yulia Latinina? Latinina is nominally a supporter of Ukraine, but yeah,
She's not.
not
She's not.
really.
Look at the tweet when she says, "Oh, what was it the holidays or something?" And she was saying, "Oh, everyone is expected to be half of the Kiev destroyed, but only a few kids died. Let's move on." And then when Dugin's daughter, Dugin,
Daria
evil
Dugina,
of Russian propaganda, the oldest narrative, the thinking, was killed. And it's like, oh, why would you kill the child? It's actually, child was part of the propaganda machine. She was
yeah.
an innocent child. She was one of those small enough, not significant. Only surname Dugin make her significant. But there was child. And these are, it's okay to kill if you killed. And this is kind of like, going normalization of the violence in Ukraine, a victimization of those who actually press the button, give the orders, and cut in the heads for words, Slava Ukraini.
And they also came and they squealed when convicted in absentia, but convicted war criminals who are still serving with the Russian armed forces under all the rules of war. These guys are a target, whether you hit them by ATACMS or whether you get them through an exploding scooter or you carpet bomb an entire city. That obviously we don't want to see that. But within the rules of war, you can target competence. In fact, it's absolutely, especially as the victim of aggression, it's completely within your right to target those who are part of that. Even more so, those who are in commanding positions and those who have ordered war crimes and seen them carry out. And you don't even have to demonstrate it. Ukraine went the extra step by actually doing a judicial process where they showed the evidence that these individuals who were targeted with, and I've been advised not to use the word assassination because that makes it sound civilian. It's not. They hit Russian military. Now, I don't know if you followed the squeals of outrage from Russian dissidents, those who oppose Putin, Navalny and others, those who are... It's like, no. Oh, God, goodness me, you can't do that. That's against all the rules of war. No, it's not. The West would never have done that. Have they never seen the history of the Second World War? We did an absolute ton of this stuff. If we could take out senior Nazis anywhere, of course we did. So it's complete ludicrous kind of point of view. I don't know if you're following that whole.
There's no such thing as opposition. I sort of like, I become furious within a second when I hear Yulia Navalnaya. It's words about, oh, it's Putin's war. No, it's not. Putin is not raping children. Putin is not raping women. No. Who was torturing men with tied hands? No. And millions, dozens of millions of people, they are not in a square. Georgia, look at Georgia, how small is Georgia and how much violence those people went through because they don't agree. Russians, what they saying? Bring me more money. I used one husband, he died, I've got money, now I've got second husband sent to SVO or operation, right? Or interceptions, SBU or DIU posting, oh, go and rape those Ukrainian women. It's not Putin saying, it's actually Russian. And this kind of first so-called opposition, because Navalny, rest in peace, he was nationalist. He was mad, and what he was saying about Crimea, it's not a sandwich to return, is it?
He later seemed to reverse that point of view. I find it quite interesting. There are other interesting things. People get very kind of like, oh, he was brave, he suffered, etc. Yes, he did suffer. He intentionally went back to Russia, knowing that he would suffer, knowing that he would die. This in itself is an extremely weird thing. Lenin didn't do that. Lenin was a terrorist. He was a ruthless terrorist. Was he going to put himself in the hands of the Akhrana, or the Tsarist police? Of course he wasn't. He wanted to win. He wanted to win. He wanted power. He wanted to take over, obviously for evil and appalling ends. But he was focused on taking power, and therefore it would be strategic lunacy to place yourself as a captive in the hands of your enemy. No, you want to take them down and destroy them. And this is why it sounds like an odd sort of comparison. I compare Russia's current opposition to the ruthlessness that the Bolsheviks showed. And I've come to the conclusion that most of them don't want power. They're actually scared of having power, that they don't organize to take power, and they don't really have an idea of what they'd want to do if they took power, except perhaps carry on the thieving. I mean, that, if you're going to be cynical, that's probably what a few of them think. There's a few like Ponomarev who are in Ukraine, who are working with those Russians who are fighting in the trenches with the Ukrainians. Now, I'm not going to say they're all a savory bunch of people. They're absolutely not. But there are Russians in Ukraine fighting with Ukrainians. That I'm willing to say is interesting because it's someone who's putting their life at risk. He was recently targeted with assassination and barely made it out. There's one or two others who explicitly say Ukraine must win, Putin and Russia must be defeated. Very few talk about decolonization narratives, but one or two of them say that things have to change. But you can count them on the fingers of one or two hands at most. And believe me, I have looked everywhere for these, but there's one or two. There are a few individuals who, in their communications, raise funds for the armed forces of Ukraine. In fact, there's again, I can only think of two or three who do this. Michael Naka being one of them. I mention him a lot. In every one of his videos, he has a Ukrainian battalion coming on saying, donate, there's the link. It's not going to the host, it's going direct to the battalions and doing something for Ukrainian victory. I would accept the idea that Russia has an opposition if there were hundreds of thousands of people doing this. But no, you can count them on the fingers of one hand.
Well, in terms of prison and all this martyr or suffering, I think it's just the only way to keep themselves relevant in the eyes of the West, because they are not popular. Their narratives or their personalities do not resonate with their own people. They are useless. They have nothing to do, and it's kind of, it's like christening, sort of like, I did my term. And then, for example, like someone who've been super rich, spent years in the prison, and now he is in sort of like having the right to say something or interpret for the West and saying, oh, Putin doesn't destroy the center of Kiev. He can because he's too kind, or because he's deliberately choose not to do so. It's not Ukrainian air defense. It's not, many people died actually in central Kiev. But going this misinterpretation and through this way through the prison, they legitimize the sometimes a ridiculous point of view and unacceptable just because they so-called opposition. So you saying that you never been super charmed and kind of took it critical of the Soviet Union and Ukrainians at the same time, or Ukrainians actually came through the full-scale invasion for you?
I mean, I have to admit, I knew relatively little about Ukraine. Obviously, I've studied the revolution. I've studied the Holodomor, and it was, and people are saying, "Oh, we never heard of it. It was never mentioned." I mean, in the particular history course and the particular history teacher I had, and it may well depend on individuals. I would say quite a bit of the worst aspects of the Soviet Union and the revolution were discussed in that. The Holodomor was mentioned. At that time, I don't recall whether the word genocide or not was used or whether that was sort of common. I mean, shortly afterwards, you had the sort of genocides in Yugoslavia, so it could well have been that that wasn't front of mind. But I do remember conversations about it being a man-made famine. So, we're talking here about we're talking here about the 80s, the late 80s. So, that's maybe not the experience of a lot of people. A lot of people wouldn't have studied history at the level, A level, which I was doing there. But I do remember those kind of conversations. But there are a lot of things that have only come to light since I've started doing the podcast. The executed Renaissance, all the details of how the Holodomor was engineered. I was fully aware and very, very aware of it because my family are from Ireland originally. I studied in Scotland, so I've got a sort of certain sense of English exceptionalism and English imperialism, and I'm kind of fine-tuned to, I would say, fairly imperial attitudes, whether they're conscious or unconscious. Often they're unconscious, especially when it comes to the English who perhaps haven't people who haven't travelled that much. So I was very fine-tuned to that kind of dialogue when I was in Russia, and I was listening out for it, listening out for the kind of things I'd hear saying about people mocking Ukrainian accents, mocking Ukrainian language. Yeah, so I don't think I had that many delusions about what Russia was an entity. What I've been doing since then is sort of joining the dots, filling in the gaps, trying to build out this picture of the puzzle, how it got that way, why it functions, what's the logic behind it, which can seem so difficult for Western analysts to actually penetrate. Why does Russia show endless aggression? Why does it behave like this? And this is a process of not just filling out those gaps, but also understanding more about those countries on Russia's periphery that formed the targets of its imperial action, and learning more about Ukraine, for instance.
So the challenges within the British people, there are people who want to know or know a lot, and we have interesting conversations, and we speculate and exchange of ideas. And there are people who choose not to, and they have right to that. And sometimes, just a few months ago, I've heard the question, "Oh, is there still war in Ukraine?" It's like, well, yeah, daily, and that's until the missile hits your house, until your family is affected, people choose not to. And at some point, there was in Ukraine, and while East was invaded and Crimea was annexed, some people still were going on holidays and, treating themselves with something nice, which is fine. But I think it's somehow subconsciously we protect ourselves from things we might not be able to handle. So for me, it's different, and I got used to it, that it is different. And since I was 6, I became politically active. And in
Six,
1991,
that's an early start, yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how it's happened. It's just, I remember the first president elections in Ukraine, and my family was for Vyacheslav Chernovil, who is pro-Ukrainian. He's one of dissidents. He's basically like spiritual figure and, amazing person. And I remember myself running on sort of like during my PE lesson and making sure that my PE teacher is voting for Vyacheslav Chernovil because we need, Ukraine needs it. And my first school was gymnasium, and the head teacher of that gymnasium was dissident, and he was taken into the psychiatric asylum because he was just supporter of Ukrainian identity and culture. He was just a teacher who wanted to read and introduce his children to the Ukrainian literature. So obviously he was punished. So I remember those bits. And Russian lie and chauvinism, I'm from central Ukraine. I'm not from the West, who has the stereotype they're more patriotic or anything. No, I went through this through, my history lessons at school, through my family history, because my grandma, she told me everything about Holodomor, how many people were left. And she was saying, if you come outside at night in the village, in normal life, you would hear dogs, you would hear animals doing any sounds. During the time of Holodomor, it was absolutely quiet because cats, dogs, everything was eaten. There was nothing. And she was witness. There were people who ate own babies, all those atrocities where people were conditioned to survive through impossible. And this is where Putin will choke and Russia will choke, because if we, the nation, in order to survive, sacrificed, the dearest to our heart, he won't defeat us. He will break. He just doesn't understand that all this still resistance. It's been shaped through hundreds and hundreds of years. There's no chance for him. No matter what he says or how some of his allies or useful idiots speculate about his mysterious soul or him safe in the face, it's just ridiculous. If they don't know about Ukrainian resistant fight, and no necessarily through revolutions, just being there. Do you know, I have interesting situation in 2012 when, I don't know, are you the fan of football?
I'm afraid I'm not. That's already going to lose me some subscribers, but no.
Is the name David James tell you anything? So he was the goalkeeper. He's the legend, and he was invited to Ukraine by BBC Sport. I was working for BBC Sport back then, and I was looking after him. And basically, what does it mean? I'm coming in the morning to his hotel, picking him up, and we just spend the whole day. And by the end of during his lives and everything, and then he's delivered, and the next day at the same time. I think during that time he was awarded MBE. Is it correct? For his charity work. So anyway, and one of the activities he it was very strange. Because he asked me, can we go to Ukrainian History Museum? And I would like to have the tour on the history of Ukraine. I was surprised because I had worked with other football legends who were in Ukraine, but no one wanted that. So we went to Ukraine, and I was translating for him to the museum, and I was translating for him. And my shock was, I was always good in history. I liked history. It wasn't something new, but there's my own revelation that how can we survive? How could is this possible? How possible that we have the state? How possible that we have the language? How possible that we have the heritage, which is like over 1,000 years old? How is that possible? If, it's like on every turn of the history, obstacles, and punishment and everything. And now, since 2014, I was participation of Orange Revolution 2004. Now, the Revolution of Dignity, I was already in the UK and I had newborn baby, so I couldn't be able there. Now I'm not on the front line, but it's my bleeding wound But I know we will go through this. We will win. And it doesn't matter how some people, especially among the British speaking heads on Ukrainian conflict, said, well, there's a time for compromise and sacrifice the territory. Guys, you don't know what you're talking about. We are survivors. We survived through all those empires, which were so much bigger than Ukraine. There's no chance, not Putin, not anybody else. We
Uh,
just, this is, we are the nation of warriors.
And this
And
isn't a Russia, the Soviet entity was, once they consolidated power, it was strong. The Tsarist Empire was weak and strong at the same time. So you were fighting something which was, I mean, the Tsarist Empire in the late 19th century was developing the secret police. It was developing quite a substantial, industrial base. Parts of Ukraine, of course, within the empire were built up. It was a wealthy entity that's able to project power and suppression. You're dealing with Russia now, which is yes, it's kind of strong, but strong in a weak kind of way. I would say it's an entirely degenerate entity. Um, Cooperation is poor, innovation is poor, because that's way it's organized. Corruption is, if anything, even worse than it was in the Soviet period. I mean, this is a highly degenerate empire. So I think your chances of defeating it, if not directly retaking all the territories now, I kind of believe that chances of retaking all the territories at some point in the near future, especially when Russia disintegrates further, I agree. I think they're quite high.
absolutely. And on disintegration, have you seen the map in Kirill Budanov office when the Russia is a bunch of sort of communities, let's call it like that? And yeah, it's kind of like it's my light at the end of the tunnel. And if Ukraine didn't have a chance, they would take within 3 days.
Yeah.
But no, this if we resisted back then, and the people actually who are fighting or creating different things. For example, not long time ago, I had the commander of Secret Group 13, who is destroying ships in the Black Sea in Crimea. Do you know? I mean, a part of the fascinating thing he does and his team, and Ukraine doesn't have fleet. Russia doesn't have any influence in the Black Sea. And then just recently, his group took down 3 helicopters using just sea drones. Think about this creativity and this adventurous spirit. It's amazing, isn't it? So I'm fascinated, and of course, it's going through the pain, because it's my country, and I lost friends, I lost people I worked, journalists who joined in February 2022, and they sacrificed their life. So yes, it is, but I promised myself that I'll hold it till the victory, and then probably I'll let myself get it out, everything.
Yes, I think a lot of people are doing that. Yeah, those who are under fire in various Ukrainian cities. It's a point of survival and resilience now, but the accumulated pain. I mean, Russia, as we were talking about earlier, is it's a deeply traumatic political structure. It's a deeply traumatized society, and it seems to me, from my experience directly there, it's designed from generation to generation to reimpose that trauma, not to clear it up and solve it, not, for central government to say, okay, we have these problems, we have these issues, we have these, traumatized people. How can we go and fix it? No, it seems to me the purpose of government is to figure out new and more ingenious ways to perpetuate the trauma, because when you do that, you can control people. When you do that, you can control the resources, etc. You can manipulate them through fear and through misguided ideas. And unfortunately, it's a lack of understanding of this, I think, which means that people will say, "Ah, yes, but Ukraine needs to be realistic." No, people who say Ukraine needs to be realistic have no idea what the reality is, no conception whatsoever of the reality. The challenge, of course, is that trauma and pain spills out to all the countries on Russia's periphery, whether it be Georgia, Ukraine, etc., they can't help but project that kind of abusive and traumatized behavior onto other people because they want everybody to be at their level. And I think it's, yes, it's about control, but it's also about, why should Ukrainians live better than me? No, come on down to our level.
Yeah, let's stall the toilets. Do you see the difference of perception of British among British viewers of your audience at the beginning of the full-scale invasion and now? Sort of like, is the discourse changed, or it's sort of like still Ukrainians and Russians the same? As long as Putin send nukes to our houses, we are fine. Let's not provoke him. What's the general mood from your British audience?
I don't think it's changed too much. I mean, again, I think a lot of people have been sort of filling in the gaps and learning more. And I get a lot of comments where people will say, "I knew it was bad, and I knew Russia was wrong, but I just didn't realize how wrong." So I think it's a question of taking people down a journey of greater understanding. It's different, I think, in Germany, it's different in France, it's different in other places where they have this memory of sort of detente and talking with the Soviets and, trying to create some peaceful coexistence or even celebrating Russian and Soviet culture, perhaps a lot more than we did in Britain. We were at the cutting edge of the Cold War, of course, in protecting the Western flank there on Germany and a partner of the US in that enterprise. So I'm not sure we quite had the same kind of delusions. And of course, communist ideology not as deeply entrenched here as it was, say, in Italy and other places. So I don't think it's a case of like, we're having to convert people and from one point of view, but we're taking on the journey of understanding what Russia is and how it is far more, I would say, toxic than even many people who've been deeply suspicious of it could even, imagine. I like to say that I myself am rarely shocked by anything that Russia does, but sometimes, even sometimes, you think like, I thought we'd hit the bottom of the barrel, but no, the barrel doesn't just have a new level. It's like a black hole, the barrel is infinite. But some of the idiocy. But then if you've lived in Russia at all, maybe you haven't, maybe you've never been there. Quite a few of my Ukrainian guests will say like, yeah, I've never been there, and I have no desire, obviously, to go ever. But if you have, you kind of know that anything can happen any day. Uh, it's completely unpredictable. Life is vague and unpredictable, and it can be quite sort of dangerous as well. That kind of gives people, trauma seekers a bit of a thrill, not knowing what's going to happen next. But what it does also tell you is that it's not a rules-based society. It's not a society that values human life, and it's not a society that has the same perception of what is order and what is security than we do. And I emphasize on the channel over and over, there is no perception of what freedom is. And it doesn't matter if there's no fashion, there's no real desire for it. They don't
Yeah, the
understand
slavery in
it
the
and they don't
brain.
want it.
Yeah, absolutely. When slavery is in the brain, you can't explain anything, you can't help anything. How regular do you go to Ukraine?
I've only been once. Only been
Once.
once.
Well, and you go soon again. Is
Yes,
there
going
something
again, yes.
you looking forward to? I understand you have busy work schedule, but there's something you have for your soul, for your pleasure, and you can't wait to have or enjoy it when you're in Ukraine.
Yes, simple pleasure is going back to the Partisan restaurant that's in Lviv, because that's a great experience. And the food was fantastic. And, all the waiters and waitresses dressed in, partisan national uniforms it's just a great experience there and it's deeply weird. Um, but
Do you
I,
mean Kryivka?
yeah, I think so. That's the one underground where you go
Ah, yes,
underground
yeah,
and
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And you
yeah.
have to say the password to be
That's
allowed
right.
in.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, I love that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
In fact, they don't really mind if you don't know the password, but F Putin or F Russia usually gets you through the door there. Um, I'm gonna go hopefully back to see Superhumans because that was That was an
Oh, yes.
experience. I thought it would be deeply, deeply depressing. And of course, it is very impactful. But it was also inspiring in a way that I just hadn't expected. So I hope to go back there. It's been a year, over a year, because it was August 23 when we last recorded an event and did all these trips. I've never been to Kiev, so I'm kind of looking forward to seeing some of the sites and just getting a sense or a flavor of Kiev. I've read quite a few of Andrei Korkov's novels recently, some especially the ones that set around Kiev. That was another aspect, coming back to the history thing. I mean, I knew that the civil war spilled out into Ukraine and eventually the Bolsheviks took Ukraine. I literally had no idea of how nationalistic or imperialistic the white forces were. And if only, you know, this of course was impossible, but if only they'd been a little bit more liberal or sided with Ukraine, then history would have been entirely different. But no, it was another flavor of nationalism. But I had no idea how many times Kiev was taken and retaken and retaken and retaken. I mean, it's the sheer chaos unleashed by that is extraordinary. So I'd like to go and see some of the sites there and map it to some of the books I've started reading about that. It's going to be busy, so there's going to be a lot of interviews. So as you say, there's probably not that much time to sort of do too much. But when I went to Lviv in 23, the best experience, and it's one I hadn't really expected, was actually going out to the village. It was a hot summer. I went to the dacha. The person I was staying with had a little 4x4 and he loves driving in the countryside. So we just drove all day, stopping, having a drink, having a meal, picking up people who wanted a lift on the way and just chatting to random strangers. We went to I think it might have been a Catholic shrine, but there was a shrine out in the countryside with a cold spring that gets channeled down into a kind of
Mhm.
bathing pool. And there were a lot of civilians there, but there are a lot of soldiers there who'd obviously come from the front for a week or a weekend or whatever to get some kind of calm and recharge their batteries. And just seeing, the different attitudes, the different faces, and some of the people clearly must have gone through a lot, and they just wanted that moment of sort of quiet calm in nature. Just those little experiences, and I'm looking forward to the things that you cannot predict, but inevitably, hopefully, we will get to experience.
Oh, definitely. Ukraine is always amazing experience, and the energy, the inspiration you take from there is amazing. I wish you enjoyable trip. Feel jealous. I can't go at the moment. Good luck with everything. Stay safe. And it's such a pleasure to meet you. And finally, because my subscribers quite some time in the comments were saying you should get in touch with Silicon Cat, and it's like,
Oh,
okay.
ah,
Yeah, but now sort of like we made it true.
yep.
Thank you very much, and keep in touch.
Thank you. Definitely keep in touch. I'll let you know how the trip goes. And
Oh, yes,
for the audience, yeah, I'm sure there'll be more collaborations, more projects, even live streams and various things we can plan because we're all
absolutely.
we're all in the same informational fight.